Section 20 called Protecting Occupancies. This section mainly from NFPA 101 or Life Safety Code. And by the way, this section, I was not explaining this section because you will see it's easy to get the information from this section. It's clear. If you get the question from high-rise building, for example, you can easily relate between the question and the location in the Fire Protection Handbook. So I was not explaining this section in last course or last edition, but in this edition I need to give more explanation or more value for the course, so I included section 20 in this course. First thing, let's see how the structure of section 20 and what is the chapter inside this section. The first thing, assessing life safety in the buildings. And I see this is the most important section. Most important not in terms of the exam, but in terms of your understanding. You understand the basis of the life safety code, and then you can relate between the information in this chapter and other chapters. So we consider chapter 1 in section 20 as the framework of life safety code. Then you will get from chapter 2 up to 18 occupancy one by one. So that's why I'm telling you, if you get a question in the exam related to detention and correctional occupancies, so it's not listed anywhere else in the Fire Protection Handbook except this location. So you can easily, even without index, relate between the question and the chapter in section 20. Chapter 2, board and care facilities. 3, lodging establishments and university housing. Apartment building, 1 and 2 family dwellings, manufactured housing, high-rise building, assembly occupancies, mercantile occupancies, business occupancies, educational occupancies, daycare occupancies, detention and correctional occupancies, healthcare occupancies, storage occupancies, museum, libraries and place of worship, industrial occupancies, and last thing, occupancies in special structures. Now let's see the first chapter, assessing life safety in the buildings. Then we will highlight the most important information in each of these chapters, because there is nothing to understand just to memorize the information or know the location of the information in these chapters, but we will highlight the most important points in each of these chapters. Chapter 1, assessing life safety in buildings, under the keyword life safety in buildings, assessment of, in page 49 in index. First thing, there is an important understanding or differentiation between goals and objectives. In life safety, we have life safety goals and life safety objectives. The primary difference between goals and objectives is that objectives more specific to the problem being solved. So the objective is specific, but goals, we can say it's qualitative. So goals are always qualitative and objectives may be quantitative. So we can say that the goals is broad word, but the objectives is specific word and quantitative. So this is the difference between goals and objectives. Now let's see examples or how NFPA 101 list the goals and objectives. NFPA 101 has 4 goals for life safety code to reduce the adverse impact of fire and related emergencies on people. First thing, protection of occupants not in contact with the initial fire development and improvement of the survivability of occupants in contact with the initial fire development. When any fire happens in the building, there is 2 groups of people. The first, the group that in direct contact with the fire, so we need to increase the survivability of this indirect contact and protection for the occupants who are not in direct contact with the fire development. Second thing, protection of occupants during non-fire emergencies that use the same methods as those used to address a fire event. What is that meaning? In emergencies, if you remember, when we discussed the first chapter in this course, we discussed some adverse situation like earthquakes, like floods. So it's not only the fire, but there is another emergencies can affect the safety of the occupants. So also protection of occupants during non-fire emergencies. 3, protection of occupants during hazardous material emergency. And last thing, provision of reasonably safe emergency and non-emergency crowd movement, because during emergencies and evacuation there is a crowd. We have to manage this crowd. So these are the 4 life safety goals. As you can see, it's more qualitative, not a quantitative. Second thing, let's see the life safety objectives. And NFPA 101 has 5 objectives that address occupant protection, structural integrity, hazardous material, security feature, and system effectiveness. So they list 5 specific objectives: occupant protection, structural integrity, hazardous material, security feature, and system effectiveness. Number 1, a structure must be designed, constructed, and maintained to protect occupants who are not intimate with the initial fire development for the time needed to evacuate, relocate, or defend in place. So we have to allow more time or enough time for occupants who are not in contact with fire to allow them to leave the building or evacuate the building. Second thing, structural integrity must be maintained for the time needed to evacuate, relocate, or defend in place occupants who are not intimate with the initial fire development. So the second thing, structural integrity, to prevent the collapse of the structure. Third thing, fundamental safeguard must be provided to reasonably prevent or mitigate events involving hazardous material to allow the time needed to evacuate, relocate, or defend in place occupants intimate with the initial emergency incident, also the hazardous material. Number 4, where buildings are designed and constructed to include security features to protect occupants or contents, such features must not be compromise compliance with other requirements of NFPA 101. What does it mean? Suppose you are in a bank, for example. We have a security feature to prevent non-authorized person to enter some places, but we have to think about the evacuation. In case of any emergency, we need people to evacuate the building. So we have to integrate between alarm system or whatever to take into consideration that we preserve the occupants and also achieve the security features. And last thing, systems utilized to achieve the goals must be effective in mitigating the hazard or condition for which they are being used, must be reliable, must be maintained to the level at which they were designed to operate, and must remain operational. And this is related to operation and maintenance of all of these features. So these are the 5 life safety objectives. Now let's see the characteristics of occupants, because the occupants of the building will affect how we deal with them, because not all occupants are the same. For example, in schools it's different than in offices, different than in hospitals. In hospitals, for example, they cannot evacuate themselves, but in office buildings they can evacuate themselves and they are trained and familiar with the building. So there is some consideration we have to take in characteristics of occupants. So evaluating the population at risk, means the occupants of the building, is among the first steps in a life safety assessment, and it can also be the most challenging. There is 4 categories or 4 things we have to consider and influence the ability to survive in a fire. First thing, location, where they are located in the building. Second thing, response, how they will respond to the fire. Number 3, number, how many persons or occupants in the building. And last thing, staff, is the staff available for evacuating or helping or support the occupants or not. Now let's see one by one. The first thing is the location, and this table we discussed before, if you remember, in section 4. Now it's repeated again in section 20, chapter 1, and I highlighted this at this point. So you have also to put a label to refer back to this table if you asked about the travel distance. So this table provides examples of travel distance limits. For each occupancy, as we discussed earlier, there is a limitation for travel distance. You cannot exceed the limitation of the travel distance for this occupancy, as per NFPA 101 and NFPA 5000. These numbers that you can see in the table specify the travel distance to an exit and must be measured from the most remote point subject to the occupancy. So that means you consider the most remote location from the exit. Okay, now let's see this table and get more information. We already highlighted this in section 4, but just for refreshment, we have here the type of occupancy, and the type of occupancy we have two things, either to be new occupancy or existing occupancy. And also we have either to be unsprinklered or sprinklered. If the occupancy is sprinklered, that means it will have some allowance. So you can see there is increasing in the travel distance. We can say it's like an allowance because the building is sprinklered, but you will see these numbers in unsprinklered for the same occupancy is lower. So if you ask it in the exam about residential or new residential building in sprinklered occupancy, that means you will get the intersection between new and sprinklered. So you can see here the number is 325 feet. This is the travel distance for this occupancy. Second thing, the response. In performance evaluation of life safety, assumptions need to be made regarding the expected distribution of characteristics of population appropriate or likely to the use of the building. So the occupants who will use the building, we have to consider these characteristics. And we have 4 basic characteristics: the sensibility, the reactivity, the mobility, and the last thing, susceptibility. These 4 characteristics summarized in this table. For example, the sensibility. Sensibility means to the physical cues. Sensibility to smoke, for example, sensibility to heat. So it's the ability to sense the sounding of an alarm, may also include discriminant and discrimination of visual and olfactory cues. So are they able to sense these cues or not? Second thing, reactivity. Reactivity is the ability to correctly interpret cues and take appropriate actions. Third thing is the mobility, and mobility is speed of movement, and it's related to individuals' capabilities. And last thing, susceptibility, and this is related to the product of combustion, metabolism, lung capacity, allergies, or other physical limitation that may affect survivability in fire environment. So these are the 4 characteristics that affect the response to the fire event. After that, the number, and also we discussed this during discussing section 4, and it's related to the occupant load factor, and we discuss what's the occupant load factor, and it's the area allocated for each occupant. And this table also give you the figures of occupant load factor here in the assembly use and residential use, and we know the difference between net and the total area. So we already covered this in section 4. We will not go in depth with this information. And one of the important definitions also or terms is the self-preservation. I didn't find the self-preservation definition in the first chapter, so I get the definition from later chapters. And in NFPA 101 Life Safety Code and NFPA 5000 Building Construction and Safety Code use the term capable of self-preservation, which is defined as the ability of a client to evacuate a daycare occupancy without direct intervention by a staff member. So the term self-preservation means, is the occupant able to evacuate himself or not? And the last information we will discuss here is the occupant evacuation strategies. There is 3 listed strategies in the Fire Protection Handbook. Chapter 1 in section 20 is shelter in place, relocation or partial evacuation, and the total evacuation. And we already also covered this earlier in section 4, the total evacuation that all of us familiar with. We conduct the drill with total evacuation. So that means all the occupants in the office will leave the office and go to the assembly area. The second thing, relocation or partial evacuation, that means we will select some floors or some areas to evacuate and we will keep other areas. And shelter in place, common in hospitals, they are staying at the same location or fight the fire from the same location until reach of the fire department or emergency team.